Requiem aeterna.
Hey there, this is Brent.
And this is Amanda,
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices are what have brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode 11. Why Private War? Or, Why They Pinned This Name on My Progenitor. Published in 1994 in Now We Are Sick, edited by Neil Gaiman and Stephen Jones.
A poem.
Yeah, we said we were here to discuss the mystery and wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose, and yet here we are with poetry.
Yeah, we didn't really think about that when we were composing the intro.
We should have written a better intro. What were we thinking?
So, do you have any general thoughts on this before we jump in?
Well, I was thinking about how we normally offer a synopsis of the story, that sort of thing. Don't feel entirely comfortable with trying to provide a synopsis of this poem, but
Neither do I.
really,
Yeah.
it's not so straightforward and simple and easy.
No, but I guess we can start with the volume that it was published in.
Yeah, so an interesting book. I suppose interesting is a good word for it. Now We Are Sick, and it's a collection of nasty poetry. An anthology of nasty verse is the subtitle. And it's separated into 5 sections: Nasty Habits, In Loving Memory, Less Welcome Tenants, Night Fears, and Adults Only. And Gene Wolfe's poem appears in the last section, Adults Only.
Okay, that actually makes sense.
Yeah. So when we first saw this collection, I assumed it was a riff on A.A. Milne's Now We Are Six, which is a collection of poetry for children. I don't know if you're familiar with Milne and his poetry, but as an homage, this is pretty far away from Milne.
I'm familiar enough.
I mean, Winnie the Pooh, Christopher Robin, Piglet.
Yeah, that's what I'm more familiar with.
You have a friend that you've called Tigger before for being too frenetic and energetic, I'm sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Piglet.
Oh, and a Piglet friend.
Mhm.
Excellent. I had a friend that we called Piglet as well. I don't think it was the same friend. Yeah, so I went back and looked over the Now We Are Six collection just to get a feel for the tone and mood and what Gaiman and Jones might have been aiming for in collecting and editing this selection. And there's little to no overlap.
Oh, okay. But you said little.
Well, so there's the title, Now We Are Sick, Now We Are Six. Milne is writing a collection of poems for presumably 6-year-olds. There's a lot of playful, childish imagination. My copy has a note in it from a previous owner, which says that the images are very good. With a few words, Milne can paint a whole picture. Also, it provides insight into a child's life and thoughts, which is, yes, I think what Milne was trying to do here. So the only connections I found that might be vaguely interesting to a Wolfian listener would be that there's a poem called The Engineer, and it talks about trains and a brake and things that you can make with springs. So playful, and that's, very biographical and tangential.
Yeah.
And then there's a poem called Knight in Armor, and it mentions dragons. And dragons are in the opening line of Why Private War. So, Milne, Knight in Armor. Whenever I'm a shining knight, I buckle on my armor tight, and then I look about for things like rushings out and rescuings, and savings from the dragon's lair, and fighting all the dragons there. And sometimes when our fights begin, I think I'll let the dragons win. And then I think perhaps I won't, because they're dragons and I don't.
I think that Wolf probably had that in mind as he was beginning to compose this poem.
Yeah, that seemed to be the one that he was referencing. And I mean, you could read all of the poems in Now We Are Six and see if you can find a better connection. But that seemed the strongest connection to me. So he opens Why Private War. There breathe no dragons anymore, and throttling bears is such a bore. It's always soppy at the shore when you're too young to get a whore.
Yep. So I think, in one sense, if the other collection is about turning 6, this collection seems to be about you're no longer a child, but you're not an adult either. And I guess I would classify this as the perils of puberty.
Yeah, it seems to be a dip into the trough of adolescence.
Trough is a good word.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no dragons. Throttling bears is a bore. And then I take it's soppy at the shore, like that's boring.
Right. We're not going to go and build sand castles and yeah.
Yeah. And then you're too young to get a whore. You're a kid, so nobody takes you seriously.
Yes.
Even though you feel like you know it all.
Right.
The next 2 lines. Yes, earth seems dull on every score, and even stealing from the store brings you your weary sigh, what for?
Yeah. So life has lost its sense of mystery and wonder, and there's not even any thrill in stealing a candy bar.
Yeah. And I think I don't know if I ever experienced, because I wasn't one that was given to shoplifting as a child.
I think that's a good thing.
I think it was a good thing too. However, I did know people who were shoplifters, and that point where like they were no longer getting the thrill from it. Like I do remember that. And that would kind of seem to be 5th, 6th grade, junior high is when they were, it wasn't, you know, most of the kids had a job or some sort of income where they were, whatever, mowing lawns or that type of stuff. So shoplifting a candy bar wasn't that big of a deal.
Because now they could earn money to legitimately buy the candy bar.
Yeah. So, but I definitely remember, I won't say friends, but people that was, well, you know how it goes. Like oftentimes you have people in your sphere that are more, it's proximity.
Oh, yeah. And, who wants to be friends with shoplifters?
Exactly.
I had a sibling, I'll keep it vague, who did shoplift a candy bar. And it wasn't such a thrill because they were caught almost immediately. And the full ritual humiliation of apologizing to the manager of the store and returning it and severe punishment at home. So the idea of finding it thrilling is strange to me because I watched that unfold and it's like, well, I'd be an idiot to ever do that.
So the next 3 lines here. Yes, wait, O child I adore. There still remains the secret lore that lurks behind the men's room door.
Yeah, so there's some secret hiding out in the men's bathroom that will give you a thrill of initiation into adulthood.
Yeah, and I think there's several things here, like, when we get into the next lines, but definitely the men's or boys' restroom in public school, I get a sense that they're very different from the girls' restroom, or at least a different type of chaos. And there's the like the bragging and like I remember there was the kids that would steal Playboys and like sell them
And the transactions would go on in the boys' bathroom at school.
Yeah, so all that.
Well, we have a representative from either side of this divide sitting here at the table. There was no initiation into adulthood in the sense of this poem going on in the women's restroom, at least never when I was in there. There were the things that went along with impending womanhood, but my sense is that this is one of the significant divides between the life experience of adolescent boys and adolescent girls, is that adolescent boys come into their manhood full of energy and desire and, enthusiasm and braggadocio, and women enter adulthood, enter their womanhood in literal physical pain, as well as the turmoil of emotional change. And it seems that while both sexes can experience a sense of shame and uncertainty about that transition, my experience as a teenage girl and with, all the teenage girls around me, were that we were sharing kind of horror stories about the suffering we were enduring. I won't get any more graphic than that, I don't think, unless provoked. But, well, the collection of poems has some interesting things in it. But it was not like what I see being described here. So if you're saying that this is reflective of reality, then it confirms some of my assumptions.
It is, and I think it's reflective of a reality that hasn't transitioned into the digital age as much. So, and I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay. Do we want to read a few more lines?
Yeah.
There you may learn of slaves of gore, the functions of our human spore, the hammer of the great god Thor, and other things good folks abhor. And you shall learn by metaphor and scratchings of some gay graffitor, as o'er those winsome walls you pour. I know it well, it I know sore.
Well,
we all know what the hammer of Thor is.
Well, I was going to start with slaves.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's a large series. It started in 1966, and the first series went through 1988, and that's like 25 books, but now
So better than a book a year.
Yeah, and then I looked it up, and he started writing again in 2001, and I think there's 32 books in the series now.
My goodness, he's prolific.
Yeah. It starts out as a kind of a Edgar Rice Burroughs type go to another planet. So it's about a man who he's out camping, and his father sends a spaceship to pick him up.
Oh.
Yeah, and his father's on this other planet. It's called Counter Earth, which it orbits the other side of the sun, opposite from Earth. And it's actually a giant spaceship.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so there's this isn't doing it justice, but there's like insects they're the alien species that kind of run it, and they're kind of considered to be gods, but they're fairly apathetic about the people. And there's like a spider alien. They look like spiders. The people fly these eagles, tarns, and there's crossbows and swords, and it kind of starts out as this exciting, like sword and sorcery planet type thing. But then as the series progresses, it gets very, it's about the subjugation of women to the point where they're like branding them and putting slave collars on them.
Wait, literally branding women?
Yes. So that's how they get marked as a slave.
Okay.
And
Are there free women?
Some.
Okay.
So, but then there's a twist, so to speak. The women are more free as slaves, like they enjoy it.
Oh my, what a creative fantasy.
Yeah. And
they embrace their slavery.
They embrace their slavery.
So basically what you're saying is, they're happiest if they just accept their subservient position.
That would be a correct statement.
Interesting.
I think the reason why he references it here is because they were sold a lot back when they first came out. They were sold next to John Carter's series and other.
So just on the shelves with other fantasy.
Yeah, and it's benign enough at the beginning, but then it's around like book 6 or 7 they really go off the rails.
And it really becomes about the subjugation of women rather than the subjugation of women being a plot thread.
Yes.
Okay.
So Michael Moorcock, he advocated for them to be top shelf products. So essentially pornography is what it amounts to.
Right.
I don't know if as a result of him doing that or, campaigns he was involved in, they haven't really been sold, but they've had a new life as digital books.
Right, because you can read them on the subway with no one seeing
Yep.
you.
So, and then interestingly enough, when I was looking this up, apparently like 50 Shades of Grey has reignited an interest amongst
Right,
women
right.
of these books. So
That sophisticated story about women's, healthy sexuality, it reignited interest in this.
yeah. So part of the reason I think Wolf has this in here is there's a section from The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. And he says, "But in the act of love, we are not merely ourselves. We are also representatives. It is here no impoverishment, but an enrichment to be aware of the forces older and less personal than we work through us. In us, all masculinity and femininity of the world, all that is assailant and responsive, are momentarily focused. The man does play Sky Father and the woman the Earth Mother. He does play form and she matter. But we must give full value to the word play. Of course, neither plays a part in the sense of being a hypocrite, but each plays a part or role in something that is comparable to a mystery play or ritual at one extreme and to a mask or even a charade at the other. A woman who accepted as literally her own this extreme self-surrender would be an idolatress offering to a man that belongs only to God. And a man would have to be a coxcomb of all coxcombs, indeed a blasphemer, if he arrogated to himself, as the mere person he is, the sort of sovereignty to which Venus, for a moment, exalts him. But what cannot lawfully be yielded or claimed can be lawfully enacted." I think Wolf putting that in here as one of the things that you have to navigate in adolescence is that you are playing a part. And if you don't accept that, like the natural thing is to go thinking that subjugating other people is something that you should be doing as a human.
Right, so he's invoking this cartoonishly, sexist I don't even think is the right word, because sexist just has such a modern connotation of I'm not enacting equality. It's much more dire in a way and complex than that, which is he's invoking these stories that are taking seriously and absolutizing something that ought to be mythologized and part of play and
Mhm.
and joyful conscious enactment,
Yeah.
not conscious assumption.
Yeah.
So yeah, Slaves of Gore.
Yeah.
That's a lot packed into one little line.
It is. I'm not recommending any reader check it out. I accidentally bought the entire series one time. Well, 24 to 25 was at a bookstore when I
Okay.
was younger.
Okay.
By younger, I mean like in high school. And I saw them and they have covers similar to.
Right. They look like fantasy stories.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, a whole set of books for 24 to 25. And then I got them and I was like, oh.
Whoops.
And then I was very embarrassed and I did not go back to that bookstore for a while.
Well, that's understandable because you went and picked up 24 volumes of smut.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, that would be, I think, analogous to my discovery that I don't know how to pronounce her name, Jean Auel, Auel, Jean M. Auel. Her Clan of the Cave Berry series is not, prehistoric historical novella. It's prehistoric historical novels. Obviously, they're huge. They're not novellas. They're not about prehistory in a look at all of this interesting historical context sense. They're about prehistory in the look at this setting for pornography sense. My grandmother had the whole series on her bookshelf, and so that was oh, I'm not reading about, okay.
The next line, the functions of our human spore, that seems fairly self-evident.
Yes.
The hammer of the great god Thor. I had to do some research on this one.
Mjolnir?
Yeah. I think we're informed more by the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point, because we think of Mjolnir more as a weapon.
Yes.
However, when you go back and look at the iconography and the jewelry that was made for that time period. There is a sense that Mjolnir is more than a weapon. It's like a phallic blessing. And there's a section from one of the Eddas. Now, I didn't write down which one it was. I think it's the
Okay.
poetic.
Yes.
Mjolnir is stolen, and Thor dresses as a woman
Yes.
to get it back.
Yes.
And part of him dressing up as a bride is he knows that part of the ceremony, that Thor's hammer, literally Thor's hammer in this case, is brought out. And part of the blessing is the setting of Mjolnir on the lap of the bride.
Right.
So
No overt symbolism there.
no.
Very innocent. Yes.
Innocence of innocence.
Yes.
So there's definitely a lot of subtext there that doesn't come up in the Thor movies.
No, and there's also there's a moment in one of the Marvel movies. I generally, when I watch movies, it's when I'm on an airplane going somewhere and therefore stuck in a seat for many, many hours.
Okay.
So sometimes these things blur together and I can't remember them very distinctly. And also I'm watching them on a tiny little, back of the airplane seat screen. But I remember in one of the movies, he makes some comment about the balance of it being so great.
Yeah.
It's weighted perfectly or something. And that flies somewhat in the face of the myth of the making of Mjolnir, where it's being forged, and I'm pretty sure it's Loki is stirring up trouble and causing problems, and he's sending flies to bite the eyes of the dwarf smith that's crafting it. And so the handle is actually shorter than it's supposed to be because the smith is having such great difficulties. So that was where my mind went with that, is that, boys in the bathroom would be worried about whether or not the hammer was correctly sized.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and other things good folks abhor.
Right. Which is why we're uncomfortable talking about it.
Yes.
Because we're good folks, people.
I feel like if you have to say it, it means it's not true.
Yes. Other scratchings?
And this is the section that I don't think has transferred into the digital age, because, and actually now that I think about it, this may be a class thing. Maybe I'm just living in better spots than I used to growing up.
Right.
But graffiti in the men's room used to be very
aggressive.
Yes. And just as a random example that popped in my mind, one time we were traveling through, I want to say either Winnemucca or Lovelock, and we stopped because this was with my family when I was in grade school, and I needed to use the restroom. So I went in there, and there's this, like, the entire, there's a novel written on the wall of the men's restroom, and it was this gay man was explaining how you, like, come out, and if you, like, I'll know you're here for whatever if you do this motion and this motion, and then if, like, so it was like this elaborate ritual to come out to his trailer.
Oh yeah. So it, engraved instructions for picking up other people.
Yeah.
So it seems like some of this might have changed because of the transition from a closeted world to an uncloseted world.
Yeah.
I don't want to reveal too much about our location, but there's a senator famously from our state who the wide stance in the airport restroom. Yeah, so sort of this passing on of information. Now it's all written all over the internet and or not necessary.
Yeah.
Or not as necessary. There's an app for that. And so we don't need as much graffiti. So I feel like somewhat a cultural shift has taken place in that what used to be scratched in public restrooms is now just simply said aloud or communicated in a digital space.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of shocking to think of that much stuff being scratched in the bathroom walls, because I did not grow up in a different social class than you did, and many highway rest stop,
Mhm.
gas station in a small town, specifically Winnemucca at one point or another. I never saw anything like that. I never saw more than maybe a single word scratched into a bathroom wall,
Hmm.
and very often not even that much. So the worst thing about women's public restrooms is that occasionally you'd find a discarded sanitary product of some sort that didn't make it into the trash can, or there's all the little bits of toilet paper that are torn off and then kind of have fallen on the floor. And so it looks like there's just paper everywhere and it's just kind of gross looking. And you might get it stuck to your shoe. This is about the extent of the difficulty that.
Yeah, consider yourself lucky, because I remember the toilet seats used to have poems etched in them.
Oh my
Like
goodness,
people
that's
carved-
horrible.
Yes, carved with a knife. The tiles, people would bring in stickers, like white stickers, but and so then they could cover up other poems.
So we could layer the graffiti.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then people would draw art. I'm using art here metaphorically.
Yes.
But then they would that fixant that you spray paint fixant that you can it's clear, so when people draw in pencil, so you don't smear it,
Mhm.
they would take that into the bathrooms and spray it over their drawings, so then it was harder to for them to clean. So you ended up having to paint over. Like, I remember looking up at the ceiling, and there'd be things written up on the ceiling, sometimes on the floor.
Who has the energy for this? I mean, maybe it's just carrying a pocket knife in your pocket, since, as a man, you have clothes that have pockets. And if you have a pocket knife, you must carve something. Maybe it's just the pure id that is released when that first flood of testosterone hits. Maybe, I don't know.
I don't know either, because it's not something I see
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, yeah, and did it also used to be the case that men took less time in the bathroom than women? Because my sense is that men tend to take less time in the bathroom than women do, and they also had time to carve all this graffiti in there. Okay, now we're going to get to the point of the poem where I'm a little confused.
I would agree with you here. This section changes.
Tone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so little man, learn one thing more. Add but my number to the core. 'Tis triple X, XX54. And this old hand will spill your gore. I'll pour your guts out on the floor. Nor will I like you furthermore. What?
So I think, and this is based off of my experiences in the 80s, trying to
Going way back.
Yeah, 80s, early 90s, trying to use a restroom. There was often people that would linger in the men's restroom.
I am officially sketched out.
Like I said, times have changed.
Okay.
I think
Because in the 80s, you were still a little boy.
that is correct.
Okay.
I think we have a perspective change here. And so little man would be something that one of those people in there would say to you say little man to a boy to, acknowledge that, oh, hey, you're grown up. Like, I noticed
Right.
you. And I think because then it's like to triple X, so which is porn, but then you also have XXX. So you have but that's for a phone number, the first three
Okay.
prefix, which was fairly common to have that stuff.
Like phone numbers carved into the...
Yeah. So I think...
Wait, that song is now starting to make sense to me.
Oh, okay.
867. Yeah. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the perspective change here is that we're getting this from somebody who's trying to pick up younger people in the
What a polite way to say creepy old men were being
sexual
predators. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and that's the spill your gore, nor
Mhm.
will I like you furthermore. So
Okay.
it's the act.
Okay.
And I don't think I'm alone in being I've heard other people talk about that's a thing. Like, it was a thing. I don't hear
Yeah.
about it as much anymore. So I think that
Okay.
that is that perspective shift there.
Okay. That makes sense. I couldn't make sense of that stanza. I was having a hard time with it. But then that would help with the final stanza. Kid, I'll forgive you well before you hear the splash of Charon's oar. Then great God's mercy I'll implore, and wrap me in a mantle pour. So there seems to be some sort of invocation of repentance or
Mm-hmm.
regret for terribleness.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about this section has a title to it?
Oh, yeah. And it's French, so it's hard to say. L'envoi or l'envoi. I think, well, I don't speak French. My theory with French is that you mumble and drop any final consonants.
I can agree with that.
If there are any French people listening, I would apologize. But anytime I've tried to speak to a French person, they were just very indignant that I didn't speak French, and then they spoke perfect English to me. So I haven't been able to learn.
The definition for that, it's like a detached set of verses at the end of a
Yes.
composition to convey a moral or meaning.
Yes.
It's also a poem that Kipling wrote for a woman who ended up, she rejected him.
Oh, okay. I did
So-
not know about this Kipling connection.
Yeah. So he was interested in this younger woman, and she expressed that she was not interested. And he kind of, so part of the reason why he was interested in her is she was an artist too.
And not because she was a younger woman? I mean, what kind of an age disparity are we talking about here?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I'm gonna, It's-
It was probably at least creepy by our standards.
yeah, but
Okay.
normal for the time period.
Yes, we'll normalize these things. Is it normal on gore?
As much of a fan of Kipling that Wolf was, I think he had that in mind. And
Mhm.
because it's kind of a parting, like he says, okay, I know this, we're not gonna see each other again. And then he didn't, it wasn't collected until after he died.
Okay, so he had sent a poem. Do you have a copy of that, or can you give a summary of what it was, or just an expression of his, regret or?
Okay, so the poem itself is longer. There's probably a dozen stanzas or more, and it doesn't summarize super easily.
That's okay.
Yeah, so it has a lot of imagery, and like at one point we're in the Mississippi Bay, and another point I think we're in the Middle East.
Okay,
And
it's a well-traveled poem.
It is, and then there's a point where we're probably in Rome, and then maybe Mongolia, and so there's a number of things that are going on in the poem. But at the end, the last stanza says, "The Lord knows what we may find, dear lass, and the deuce knows what we may do, but we've back once more on the old trail, our own trail, the out trail. We're down, hole down on the long trail, the trail that is always new." It's about them parting.
Okay, so I'm not sure entirely what to make of this final stanza here. I already read part of it, but I'm going to go ahead and just reread the whole thing. Kid, I'll forgive you well before you hear the splash of Charon's oar. Then great God's mercy I'll implore, and wrap me in a mantle pour. Bind rueful brows in mandragore to please the judge and each juror, which is a strained rhyme there. Recant like an ambassador, and break each grave judicial snore with many a penitential roar. So, what have you unpacked from that?
Well, I believe mandragore is the mandrake.
Yeah, mandrake root. That's what I came up with.
Mm-hmm. The ferryman of Hades is in here.
Yep.
And that is, so it's something to do with,
Did we kill the predator and now he's on his way to Hades?
I don't know. This part is difficult for me. I don't exactly know what's going on because there's death is in here, but then with the mandrake root, the mandrake is multiple layers of meaning. It shows up in the Bible,
Yeah.
as a plant for fertility,
Yes.
but then it's also a magic plant in medieval texts and in ancient texts. But it's also a plant of death. It's a poison.
Yes.
So I don't know which one he's referencing, and maybe all of them.
Right.
The wrap me in a mantle pour, I assume, is the death,
A shroud.
a death shroud.
Yeah, that's what I read for that.
The section that I don't quite get with the twist in the last 4 lines is then we're before a judge and the jurors, but then you're an ambassador.
Yeah, to recant like an ambassador and break each grave judicial snore with many a penitential roar. This seems a strange mix of immunity, like, diplomatic immunity, and defiance in the face of a trial, which doesn't go with rueful brows, mercy I'll implore, and going down to the grave peacefully.
Yeah, there's only one way that I can make sense of this.
Okay.
So if we take the entire structure of the poem as a navigation for a young male to get out of adolescence,
Okay.
the only thing that I can think of is if we take a step back and we remember that Wolfe was a Catholic with this death imagery, but at the same time, like, seems to be a passing through death without the judgment.
Right.
I think the arrow pointing beyond the text is that the way out of all of these, this word isn't used in here, but sins, the things that you need to avoid, the treating women as though they're slaves and subjugating other people, the sexual predator aspect of this, the wallowing in sexual sins. I think the thing that's pointing beyond this is that there is some sort of forgiveness, because this is something that, while you should be ashamed of, it's also something that everybody has to go through.
Right. So this is there's a death that's necessary, but it's not the final death, because this is a process that you have to go through to mature.
Yeah.
That, I think that's a good way to make sense of it. It also, I don't want to move on too fast if you have more to say about this, but it also seems to point to something interesting about this poem's place in the collection.
Okay.
I didn't read the entire collection, but I read a round in Now We Are Sick. And Wolfe's poem stands out for being, I think, the only one that I read closely enough to understand this about, that with some sort of trajectory out of the wallowing in sickness.
Okay.
There's goriness, there's all kinds of perversity described in different ways, and little stories told in poems that very much seem to be embracing or running into the repulsiveness of the thing. No, it's a collection called Now We Are Sick, not We Once Were Sick or We Are Now Getting Better.
Yeah.
But that idea of moving on from the sickness of adolescence, the sickness of perverse desires as a normal developmental stage, that's certainly not present in anything else that I read. There's just a lot of delight in violent imagery.
So one thing I forgot to bring this up when we were reading through, but later editions of this text, particularly translations, there is a textual variant.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so when it's talking about the gay graffiti,
yes,
gay is dropped from the poem.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's because of the ambiguity of the word gay at the time of those translations, because it could be happy,
yeah,
graffitor, or gay, graffitor.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting in the sense that you may run across it, but I don't like it. It probably tells you more about our times than it does about Wolfe's intent with the poem.
That makes a lot of sense.
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Well,
this was a difficult exercise in exegeting meaning from a somewhat odd poem.
Yeah, it's an odd poem in an odd publication. Not one that I would be like, "Hey, everybody go out and get a copy of this." It feels like the kind of thing calculated to shock or offend or I don't know, just push a little perversity into, a pseudo playful context or a playful context.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it certainly doesn't, as a collection, doesn't land for me. And so, yeah, I don't find it particularly interesting, especially not in this day. I mean, it was published in the 1990s, which is well before we all, had to face all of the horrors that the World Wide Web could, just drop in front of your eyes unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I don't have anything else.
all right, well, we can call it good.
All right.
The Unreliable Narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towle. And, as Gene Wolfe said, the design of good tubing bends is sometimes considered a kind of dark magic, but it need not be. The points to be remembered are that the tubing must be installed after bending and that it will expand longitudinally as well as diametrically as the system warms up.